This explainer video takes on things like vibration, frequency, brain state, IQ, and your health. Disclaimer right up front, we have to do that these days. I am not a doctor, a physician, a psychiatrist, or any other kind of medical professional, and I strongly encourage you, before trying any of these things, to, if you have any concerns, seek the advice of your preferred medical professional before doing anything that might be suggested by reviewing this video. Having said that, I'd also like to point out that music has been used on purpose for many thousands of years. And the results that you get are your best guide for whether or not what I'll suggest here actually works for you. It might work for you, it might not, but hey, we live in an age of disclaimers, so there's mine. Let's start with binaural beats. So binaural beats are infinitely explained online. I encourage you to use any of your favorite reference points to find out more about them. The thing I would like to focus on right now are the various ranges of binaural beats. They include delta from 0.5 to 4 hertz, theta from 4 hertz to 7 hertz, alpha from 8 to 12 hertz, sigma from 12 to 16 hertz, beta from 13 to 30 hertz. So that's something we could actually hear. That's in the range of human hearing. The ones I've mentioned so far are within the normal range of measurement for an EEG, but binaural beats go one further. The gamma range between 30 and 100 hertz, also audible, is the highest vibrational binaural beat that we normally talk about. So once again, they're delta from 0.1 to 4 hertz, theta from 4 to 8 hertz, alpha from 8 to 14 hertz, beta from 14 to 30, and finally gamma from 30 to 100 hertz. Beta and gamma fall within the range of human hearing. By the way, I will include references in the show notes here so you can actually find these documents and refer to them online, the same ones that I'm using to develop this explainer video. I want to point out the difference between what we can hear and what we cannot hear. So while we can hear some of these frequencies, if you were to play them on the piano or a guitar or something, you'd be able to hear them. What binaural beats measure is an interference pattern. That's a little bit deep. I'll leave you to your own research on that, but in actuality, we don't have to hear a binaural beat for it to exist and have an effect on us. There's a lot of things we can't hear that actually have an effect on our human systems, and the lower frequency binaural beats are that. I demonstrated in the last video the difference between 432 hertz and 440 hertz. That is an interference pattern of 8 hertz, and if you were to play both of those tones together, you would actually be getting an 8 hertz binaural beat if you had them in your left and right ears, which would fall into what range? Think about it. It's going to be theta, right. An 8 hertz binaural beat is a theta state binaural beat. Well done. Now, one more thing to say about binaural beats. There's this question of 440 or 432, what's your tuning? And then there's actually a whole range of, let's say, content out there that is tuned to one of the solfeggio tones. That is, in the reference point in regular music, we pick A arbitrarily, and we call that 440, and then we tune around that pitch. But you can pick other pitches as well. For example, if you were to tune to 174, that's equivalent basically to F3 on the piano if you're looking at a keyboard, which is a low F. It's in the 440 hertz tuning spectrum. If you tuned to 432, it would be slightly out of tune if you had a piece in 100 that was tuned to F174. There are other ways of doing that too, and you'll often hear things like tuned to 852 hertz. That's kind of an A flat, a pretty high A flat, and it's actually in between other pitches. But when they say that they're tuned in this way, all that means is that if you were to hear music instead of a binaural beat, which remember doesn't matter what you're tuned to, your music would sound slightly different than if it were in, say, 404 tuned to 440 hertz. If this is confusing, check my first video on solfeggio tones and you'll be a little bit further down the road in terms of your understanding. Okay, so I think I've made the point that binaural beats exist in spite of what the tuning algorithm might be. So you can have a binaural beat in 440, you can have the same binaural beat in 432. It doesn't matter what the music sounds like, because what you're looking for is the interference pattern, not the pitch that the particular song happens to be tuned to. Now, the idea about binaural beats is that we can use them to essentially alter our brain state. It's kind of like having a volume knob on your CPU. You turn the CPU up to a higher hertz, and you get a, quote, higher brain state out of your CPU. Turn it down to a lower frequency, and you get a lower CPU cycle. So if you're looking at your own brain, the idea is you can use a brain wave to slow your brain state down or speed it up. And that's pretty much why we need binaural beats. There's a hypothesis that binaural beats can hold you in that brain state for a period of time. For example, sleeping. When you're asleep, generally you're in a theta brain state. Everything's shut down. Your brain doesn't have too much to do. Your body's in rest and recover mode. You don't need to have a whole bunch of CPU cycles spin in your brain. If you're doing active thinking, if you're concentrating, if you're perhaps you're a musician and you're working on learning a new piece of music, your brain state's going to be running a little faster, maybe beta or gamma. But the idea behind binaural beats is that we can artificially hold our brain in a entrained relationship with whatever the frequency of the binaural beat happens to be. Okay, we're good now? Let's move forward. Now let's talk about overtones or harmonics. The monofrequency school of thought says that I can play a frequency at you, and if I hold you at that frequency, something will happen. And that's true, and that's been happening for a long time. Monofrequencies are not new. The solfeggio tones, people believe that there are certain particular frequencies that are important for particular reasons, and that's all good and it's fine. But let's think for a second here. So when you play a sound in the organic world, the sound isn't just one frequency. It comes along with all of what we call harmonics or overtones. That's because in the natural world, things vibrate at sympathetic, let's call it, frequencies. So you can see here the overtones and harmonic calculator, which you can put any harmonic frequency into, called the first harmonic, and then it will show you what the various harmonics or overtones are, and they're mathematical. When you look at the frequency for 440 and its overtones, you can see that the second harmonic is 880, the third is 1320, the fourth is 1760, the fifth is 2200. All of these things happen when you play an organic A440. Looking at the same table for A432, you can see that while the pitch is slightly changed, the mathematical calculation, were you able to do it in your head, it's slightly complicated, but it can be done, results in the same kind of overtones at the same distance, if you will, from the first harmonic. What is that distance? Well, the first harmonic, let's say, is A432 in this case. The second is an octave higher. So you just double the first, and you get the hertz of the second harmonic, which is an octave higher than A432. It's A864. And then the third and the fourth, it all goes up from there. But the interesting thing about this is if you are making these harmonics and reduce them all down to, say, a single octave, what you'll get is a very nice sounding major chord. That's not something that anyone constructed. That's just the physics of how sound in the organic world works. Why am I offering this? Well, because it wasn't until we could generate a pure sine wave frequency that we were able to isolate a particular frequency down to just its pure number of hertz with no overtones. So it is possible to produce a pure frequency now in modern worlds, like ever since we've had frequency generators that can do that and produce a pure oscillating frequency without its overtones or harmonics. However, in the natural world, where things like solfeggio tones and sound healing and all of that comes from, every time you hit a tone, you're going to get harmonics. And in the case of some instruments, such as Tibetan singing bowls, you're also going to get, in addition to the harmonics, you're going to get binaural beats. A single bowl can actually create binaural beats with one strike, as well as all of the harmonics that go along with it. That's just the way things work in the natural world. We have physics to prove that. Let's take a look now at how some famous frequencies play in the world of overtones and harmonics. So I've used the overtones and harmonic calculator again, this time to choose a fundamental frequency of Schumann resonance, which is 7.8 hertz. So we can't hear that, but it's actually possible to hear some of its overtones. Remember, the second harmonic is an octave above the first, and then you get some other interesting things. What I'd like to show on this particular screen is the fifth harmonic of the Schumann resonance, and that's 39 hertz. So 39 hertz is pretty close to 40 hertz, isn't it? I mean, within a couple of clicks. Actually, the offset that's calculated there shows that it's, in cents, it's minus 36.61. So to get to that note in 432 hertz tuning, all we have to do is to hit a D sharp or an E flat 1, which is pretty low, and then adjust it by just a little bit in order to bring it like completely in line with 432 hertz reference tuning. If you're looking at this chart, you can see the harmonics there on the left column going down, and the offset in cents. So what you're looking for is to get close to a 432 pitch reference tuning. You'd want that offset to be as small as possible. And you can see that in the case of the 11th harmonic, it gets pretty close at negative 1.61. But in all the other sort of tunings here, in all the other harmonics, the offset is, fairly large, relatively large, one way or the other. So that's the reference of a pitch of 432 hertz. Let's see how that same chart looks in 440 hertz reference pitch. I know it's awfully technical and there aren't any moving pictures, but here's the thing. When we tune with 440 reference pitch, the Schumann resonance, first harmonic, still something we can't hear, 7.8 hertz, but look how it compares now to the reference pitch of 440. Strangely enough, look at the offsets on this chart for the Schumann resonance. The harmonics are not offset by as much, generally speaking, as they were in 432 hertz reference pitch. There are some that are pretty high, like the 13th harmonic, but most of them are pretty close to 20, one way or the other, or a lot of them are at 18. There's some that are small, like 4. Some go up, some go down. But what I wanted to point out is that if you were looking at harmonics, it seems like, based on the physics of it, that the Schumann resonance falls closer to what we would hear as 440 hertz reference tuning than it does to 432 hertz reference tuning. What does that mean? Nothing. It's just an observation. But it's an observation worth making as we begin to understand how harmonics work on us. To demonstrate that in 2 more ways, I'd like to look now at 40 hertz. 40 hertz is supposed to be a pretty decent frequency for things like dealing with Alzheimer's and dementia. It's supposed to help repair the brain in some way. And that's fine. Whatever the claims are good. But 40 hertz is also right in line with our 440 hertz tuning. You can see 440 hertz is actually the 11th harmonic of 40 hertz. And that's all fine. It's pure, it's dialed in, there's no offset, it's 0, and for whatever purpose that means. But also, look at the offsets here. Now, I want to keep in mind that as you hear the harmonics of 40 hertz, they sound congruent. They sound not dissonant. They sound like they're as they should be. Some people will call that even tempered tuning. But for our purposes here, I want to point out that the offsets are fairly large, relatively speaking, to 440 hertz for the 40 hertz sort of magic hertz note. So just keep that in mind as we move forward. I'll show you this again with a 432 hertz reference pitch. So here is the 40 hertz first harmonic with all of its additional harmonics. And notice again that there's an offset. It's very rarely does it hit 0 or come close to it. The offset is there. And in terms of human hearing, would we be able to hear this? We might notice it if we really worked hard. But whether or not you're tuned to 440 or 432, the harmonics of 40 hertz, physics says they're going to be the same. The reference pitch tells you how close it is to the tuning scheme that you're in. And this one looks like it's generally the harmonics are a little higher, they're on the plus side, versus the ones that were in 440 reference pitch, which are a lot on the negative side. And of course it goes both ways. Can you draw any conclusions from these charts? No, I'm presenting them merely so you can get some idea of how harmonics work in relationship to a fundamental tone, in this case 40 hertz. So just like we did with the Schumann Resonance, we're looking at how the overtones that one would hear in nature are related to the fundamental pitch, regardless of the reference pitch or tuning pitch that we use. For completion, I'm going to do a couple more of these. This is the first of the solfeggio tones, 174 hertz, and you can see it's offset there in relationship to 440 hertz tuning. We'll do it again in 440 in a sec. The difference here that I want you to notice is how small the offsets are when you start with 174 as your fundamental frequency and your reference pitch is 440. There's a few that are way outside, but for the most part they're in the single digits here until you get up into like the 13th, the 14th. It's interesting that the 7th and the 14th are sort of the same offset. That's curious to note. Keep that in mind. Which is also true for the octave harmonics, the 2nd, the 4th, the 8th, and so on. But the point is here that harmonics and overtones are going to happen because of physics, regardless of how you're tuned. Hope that's making sense. So here's 852 hertz, and its various harmonics. This is getting pretty high. There are not going to be easy ways to hear some of these top harmonics. You could, of course, take the pitch and move it down a few octaves, and the same physics would apply. You'd be able to hear more of the harmonics. But the idea here is to take a look at that offset. Here it is at A432, and now we'll show you A440 and compare. So for this particular pitch, the offset for the various harmonics is greater when you tune to A440, or if you were tuned to A440 and played this pitch, than it would be if you were tuned to A432. Does it mean anything? Well, it's worth noting, but our actual ability to hear the differences is limited unless you're an expert in hearing. You're not going to be able to tell this stuff just from hearing a particular frequency by itself. There will be no relationship to whatever pitch it's in, except that its harmonics may in fact be slightly more or less in tune with the reference pitch that you choose. Here's what I mean by that, and you'll see that if we choose a reference pitch of 852 for A4, which is kind of crazy, but what that does is sets our reference pitch the same as our fundamental frequency, and you can see how close the harmonics are to that pitch as you read down the chart from top to bottom. Some are within range, some are right on. The octaves usually are bang on, and some are higher and some are lower. It's just physics, people. It has nothing to do with music at this point. We're just talking about overtones that are created naturally. Again, if you created 852 hertz on a tone generator, you wouldn't have the overtones. Something that vibrates in you or in the room in which you're hearing this might exhibit overtones, sympathetic vibration we call that, but a pure pitch, at least in our modern era, has no overtones. So why am I on about overtones? Because in the world of sound and sound healing, they're part of what you get too. You might get a pure frequency, you might get a solfeggio tone, but you're also going to get the overtones, and they are really important. They create, and in some cases can be, a kind of binaural beat that is happening even though you don't perceive it or hear it. You could put a scope on the sound that you're hearing and break it all down, and the scope could reveal the harmonics, the actual frequencies in hertz that are happening when you play a particular note on an organic instrument. But they're not going to be isolated. So it's important to know that you have at least, the charts go down to the 16th harmonic, you have at least 16 harmonics that exist anytime you play a natural note. It's not like you're getting a pure frequency. You're getting that frequency plus 15 others. The other probably fairly obvious thing about all of these harmonics is that they go up. Technically, you could project a harmonic down as well. For example, we talked about 852 hertz. You could lower that pitch a few octaves, and somewhere in the harmonics, you'd still have 852 hertz, but below it, you could create sympathetic vibrations that are also part of its harmonics, just lowered by octaves or other particular intervals that would be within the harmonics. That's important to know too. So it's not just up, but that's how in physics we can measure it. They go up, they get smaller, the sounds get higher, the pitches, the frequencies, the number of hertz increases as you get higher, and decreases, of course, you get lower. Okay, Bill, so I've sat around here for almost 20 minutes. What's the important point? Well, the important point is kind of a paradox, because it turns out that consciousness takes place at lower frequencies. Ask anyone who's taken a psychedelic journey what it's like to have that spiritual inspiration, that download, that beautiful sense of unity. And what they'll tell you is that that happened in a theta state. Now, they may not be aware of it that way, but that dreamy, sort of almost subconscious, lucid dreaming, that kind of thing, that is not a gamma state. That's not a fast brainwave state. That's a low frequency brainwave state. And when we use those low frequency binaural beats, we're trying to achieve that. We're trying to slow ourselves down, keep ourselves asleep if that's what we're using it for, or just relax in some fundamental way. 40 hertz, for example, a sound that you can hear, works really well for me for relaxation. And so when I want to relax, I use 40 hertz music. That is music that has a 40 hertz pedal tone or sustained tone. Some call it ostinato, but something that puts 40 hertz into the mix is going to have that effect on me. Other things in music are going to have different effect too, but obviously if I'm looking for relaxing music, then it's going to be a more ambient kind of genre with 40 hertz below it than if I wanted to dance, for example. Disco music has 40 hertz in it as well. Yes, it does. True. You can check it out. It's an E, and a lot of pop music is played in the keys of E, D, A. Doesn't matter what tuning we're talking about right now. Most of the time it's 440. What you want for relaxation is something that supports that 40 hertz pedal tone, that slowing your brain state down, right? Getting it down to a lower state. Now 40 hertz, as we know, is a pretty fast brain state, so introducing a binaural beat to lower it even further, also good stuff. But remember, you can't hear some of those binaural beats. They're happening, but you cannot auditorially pick them up. You can feel their influence on you, just like you can let go in a psychedelic state to find yourself in that beautiful theta or delta place that you want to be. And again, that place is the opening of consciousness. That place is where all of what seems like real perception disappears. And yes, at that low vibration, that very low vibration, so low we can't hear it, is where consciousness expands. So when someone tells you that you need to raise your vibration if you want to elevate your consciousness, question that, because actually the way that consciousness expands is by lowering its vibration. I'll say that again. The evidence that we have shows that at a lower vibration of the brain, consciousness expands. I'm going to include a link here to a very interesting paper from Procedia. This is from a study that was done in 2012 or 2013, and they were measuring here asymmetry between left hemisphere and right hemisphere EEG to somehow determine if there was a correlation to IQ. And what this paper postulates, and what I think the research demonstrates, is that the difference in brain state between the left and right hemispheres of the brain is significant when it comes to IQ. I'm just going to leave that there. You can read the paper, draw your own conclusions. But the point I want to make about it is that it's not just one brainwave state that we're after here. There's variability. There's asymmetry. So having your brains running at 2 different hertz, if you will, at 2 different binaural speeds, I guess is a good way of saying it, is correlated to IQ. And that is amazing because it's not just one frequency after all, is it? Maybe the frequency is helpful, but it's the contrast of that frequency with others that seems to be related to something like IQ. What could those other frequencies be? Well, they're harmonics or overtones. Or in the case of binaural beats, they could be the interference pattern that we hear when we hear the difference, sense the difference between, say, 440 and 432 hertz. Keep that one in mind. It'll help us getting out of this dead-end paradox that we've gotten into. That is, lower brainwave states equal higher consciousness, not the other way around. If you look at anyone who's practicing brain state manipulation, you'll find people who meditate, who use binaural beats, who perhaps run or work out or exercise. Static activity or sitting still activity, when I say static, I mean repetitive, tends to work on us to sort of unify our brain state around a particular purpose. And that purpose could be emptying our minds as we do in meditation, or it could be just sitting still, coming to rest as we do in Shavasana in yoga, or it could be working hard, doing mentally taxing work. All of those things are manifestations of our brain state. And we could measure the brain state doing those activities, and we could see what's what. But my point here is that wouldn't it be nice if we had some tool we could use that would give us an organic brain state that is supportive of what we need to do, and that we could deploy at any moment without having to sit still or do repetitive activity or fall asleep, in order to be able to get us going down the road. I think there is such a tool, and I'd like to show you why and how. Let me offer you a series of questions to be able to help identify, so you can identify what that tool might be for you. Suppose that you were given a way to influence your physical breath, heart, energy, movement, speed, and that same tool was also able to influence and guide what you feel, and that same tool could change your intellectual performance, maybe your analytical performance, and then finally that same tool could invite you to what some like to call higher consciousness or soft skills or a numinous experience perhaps. I think there is such a tool. If you're ahead of me here, think of what it might be. You probably already can guess. But let's take that tool and roll it forward. Let's say that tool could let us do things like improve our awareness. We could become aware more skillfully of stuff we don't like, stuff we do like. We could use the tool to help us regain memory, provide essentially a way of playing back nostalgia. So that ability to remember, it's a very cognitive kind of ability. And what if that tool, if we used it as we would do practicing, for example, Qigong or meditation, what if that tool allowed us to be very clear about what we want? If we were able to be placed in a space where we had that tool that was influencing us physically, emotionally, mentally, and consciously or spiritually, and we could use it to amp up what we want, to change our intention, or to help guide our intention, or even bring focus to it. And what if that tool was something that we could master, that took time, that we could practice, like a martial art, or perhaps playing an instrument, or creating a piece of sculpture? If there was a way that we could rehearse with that tool. And finally, what if that tool had its own rewards? And we all know the rewards of things like meditation or a gong bath. But what if the tool was able to open up the potential in paradox, or spark creativity, or improve our productivity, or even change and improve some of those soft skills, or give us a way toward higher consciousness? And if there was some ritual way that we would use that tool, the way we use yoga to prepare for meditation, or that we use Qigong postures, if there was a ritual way of employing that tool so that we could do all of the above, right? If we could use that same tool to do all of these things, is that a tool that would be interesting to you? Is that a tool that you might find useful? Now, if I told you that that tool was related to all of the hertz and binaural beats and brain states and harmonics and all the stuff that we've been talking about, that it was much bigger than just a monofrequency, if it in fact included all of the binaural beats potential, all of the frequency potential. And what if I told you that you didn't have to sit in one place with headphones to be able to use this tool well, that through practice you could deploy it any time you needed it, and that it comes in all kinds of flavors. So depending on the brain state that you want, or the effect that you want, or the task that you have at hand, you could put this same tool to work for you skillfully and practice it and become better at it, and eventually become a master of this tool for any purpose. Would that be of any interest to you? Well, such a tool, of course, does exist. It's called music. And music doesn't really care what your tuning reference point is, whether it's 440 or 432. It really doesn't care what tones you hit along the way. The beauty of music is that it's not a sitting still tool. It's an active tool. It's one that you can use, that you can move. Yes, you can sit still with it, as I do with 40 hertz when I want to relax. But if I need music, I can use that music to work out. and change the way that my physical performance is. I can use that music to help find emotions that I want to release, to let go. I can use that tool to change my intellectual performance and speed up my analysis. I can use that tool to do things like invite myself to be more skillful with soft skills or to find my way into higher consciousness. Many musicians that I know use music for that numinous trip that is very similar to the psychedelic journey, to elevate consciousness in a way that brings them into a state of unity or panegoic consciousness. Now, that's one of the functions of music too. It's not just about dance or relaxation or memory. It's about all of that and more. I said earlier that this tool can help resolve paradox. For example, the paradox of how a lower brainwave state, a lower brain hertz, if you will, is an invitation to higher consciousness. So how do you do that? Well, it turns out that if you combine music with intention, you exponentialize music's power. That is, instead of passively sitting there and listening to some binaural beat, you can actively move forward with music that stimulates that binaural beat, if that's what you need, as well as a bunch of other stuff, right? It's not just monofrequencying it. It's not just sitting there with one tone playing in your ears, or even a binaural beat playing a little differently and creating an interference pattern between your left and your right ears and creating a brainwave state. It's all that and more. And if you bring your intention to music, particularly music that you love, you're going to find that music not only amplifies whatever the intention is that you have in mind, it actually helps to put you in a state where you anticipate the potential for outcomes. I know we talk about law of attraction and all that, but so let's just say your intention is to be more loving, and you find some music that sparks that feeling inside of you, the feeling of love. And you combine that music with what you say when it comes to be more loving, and what you do when it comes to being more loving. You're going to find that music itself not only does the physical part, the intellectual part, the emotional part, but it opens up a potential inside you that you didn't recognize that you had. A potential you're not going to get from some tone or even from some beat. Music is going to work holistically to do physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual or consciousness collaboration within you, let's say, to make the effect that you want more holistic and to bring you in alignment with that effect in a way that no single tone can do by itself. The best part here, of course, is that music does this in real time. And if you've practiced, if you've mastered the way that you allow music to work on you, you don't have to go sit still in order to have the effects that you want. You can roll that stuff forward right now, immediately, and have all of it wrapped into place as you work. So let me quickly summarize where we've been here together today. We spoke about binaural beats and how they work on us, why we don't need to hear them, why their tuning reference pitches don't matter. We talked about differences between pure sine wave and naturally occurring frequencies, and we spent a lot of time looking at overtones for those frequencies in order to make the point that when you get a single frequency, or what I call a monofrequency treatment, you're actually getting quite a bit more than just that single frequency. You're getting, well, at least 16 overtones, sometimes more. We talked about the kinds of instruments that can make those beautiful overtones happen, and how naturally occurring sounds have overtones, and again, how a pure sine wave does not. Overtones, of course, or harmonics, are very important in sound healing. And they're also, of course, important in music, whether it's entertainment or music for a particular purpose. The interesting paradox that comes from all of this is that rather than raising your frequency to raise your consciousness, consciousness actually starts to take place as we lower our head-brain frequencies. In other words, we become more aware of the unity consciousness or panegoic consciousness when our brain is at closer to a resting state than when it is busy. We also talked a little bit about how to manipulate the brain state. There are lots of practices that are useful for this. There are lots of therapies that are useful for this. The difference between a practice and a therapy, just to be clear, is that a practice is something you can do on your own to gain mastery, and a therapy is something that is given to you by a practitioner of some kind. We talked about the marvelous brain state tool called music that one can use individually on their own to maximize performance of not just the head brain, but of the heart, the gut, and the spiritual or consciousness or pan-egoic sense of humanity. And then we talked about the importance of connecting intention with music and how that supercharges the intention. By adding music, the holistic stimulus to it, you don't just get a better brain state, you get a better emotional state, you get a better physical state, you get a better spiritual state, a better consciousness state. And then, of course, we gave an example about how combining an intention to be more loving with music can work. Now, just before we sign off, I want you to bring it all together. So if you would, imagine with me that you're going to a dance. Let's say you're going to a dance where there's going to be a DJ. And the DJ rolls out, and in front of him, he's got 9 different platters. And each one of those platters can make one tone. And it'll make organic tones. Let's say it's going to make organic tones that have overtones to them, harmonics to them. All of those things are available. And as the DJ starts to play, these tones start to enter the room. And you look around, and everybody in the room is kind of curious about what's happening because it's just tones. There's no beat, there's no rhythm. Nobody's really feeling inspired to move. But the DJ comes over the voiceover and says, hey, we want you to know that these are the solfeggio tones. And that they're going to make you do all these things, and this is how it's going to feel, and all of the stuff, and trust me, it's going to be great. And you sit there because you came to dance and nothing's happening, and there's no movement taking place. And after a while, it gets so boring that the DJ gets thrown off the stage and somebody else shows up. And this DJ actually has access to tracks and begins to play real music, and there's a beat, and it moves, and there's interest, and there's melody, and there's lyrics, and well, sometimes there's lyrics, sometimes they're not, and people all of a sudden begin to move, and begin to respond, begin to feel things, and actually begin to interact. And the dance begins to move forward, and it reaches, after several hours, a high point, and then a big ballad is played, everybody comes close together, slows down. And from then on, after the ballad to the end, it's just incredible. It's the most amazing dance party you've ever been at. The music is incredible. You're moving, you're having fun, you're feeling things that you had never felt before. And around you is swirling this energy of what it's like to connect with and move with and enjoy the people who are in the room with you. Which is the dance party you'd rather attend? You have access to both. And yes, I know it's important to be able to slow down and to enjoy monofrequencies when they happen. But as human beings, we're designed for more. We're designed to be able to embrace music that moves in time, that tells a story, that gets us to dance, that gets us to feel, that makes us laugh or cry or get angry or afraid. That's what we're set up to do. And to be able to take full advantage of that takes much more than a frequency, even if that frequency has overtones. It takes much more than 9 frequencies, even if those 9 frequencies have overtones. It takes those frequencies being combined into something that has direction and story and movement and emotion and shape. That's what we respond to as human beings, because that's the story of how human beings are. And that's the invitation that exists for you in music. Thanks for sticking with me this long. If you have any questions, please email me, bill@musomorphic.com, or check out musomorphic.com or quest.musomorphic.com, where we teach online how to use music in this way. Thanks for listening. Be well.